Coming up, the Summer League is behind the Brooklyn Nets, and now the focus becomes the upcoming season. We take a look at win total predictions. How dangerous could this team be in terms of wins and losses? Also, expectations for more trades this offseason. We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marnbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know that today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms, they do apply. And Doug, hey, man, we talk about teams. We talk about getting to the regular season and the dream, the optimism that springs eternal to have success. But in the Nets case, we're going to focus on win totals and just how low they can go to secure the best odds for next year's draft class.
Yeah, our friends over at FanDuel have released their over-under win totals for the upcoming season. We got there. That's a true sign of summer when those first come out, right? When it usually means free agency is kind of wrapped up. We have an idea of like how most teams are sort of unfolding for the current season. And it's love to take a look at this. And the Nets come in easily dead last, baby, at 19 and a half.
Yeah.
It's one of the lower win total preseason win totals we've seen in some time. I believe in like the last 6 or 7 years when I looked back, and that was just a testament to sort of like where the direction of this team is, what direction they're going, which is to say tanking, and how the rest of the markets, and liquid markets. I mean, these are with the part not super liquid. I mean, sometimes these win total ones have some caps on them, but in terms of just like how analytics kind of are showing how the Nets are going to favor here. So I had them coming in at 20 and a half. It was one off, and it looks like they're going to be 19 and a half. We could talk about whether or not we like the over or the under on that win total. What was your first reaction when you saw that number? Surprise, not surprise, low, high? I mean, how'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, not surprised because we understand the state of this roster and the direction that they're going this upcoming season. But I will say, for a team, when you think back to Mikal Bridges and basically taking him out of the equation right now, that's the big move here. And understanding that it's more than just one player and it's the collection of talent and all that other stuff. That's 12. Was that 12 wins from a year ago? Like that's a significant 13. You're talking about 10 to 15 win total difference based on taking Mikal Bridges out of this equation. And I do wonder if it is also on the premise of more to come here, of more to come for the Brooklyn Nets, or if we're just looking at it and saying, listen, you can slice this any way that you want, but there is, as of right now, not a collection of players that you would look at this roster, at least on paper, and say they're capable of going out night over night and winning a lot of basketball games. So I wouldn't say shocked. I think you had talked about this on a previous episode, the nature of wins and losses and how it's flattened in the lottery a little bit. So these numbers are never going to get down into where some teams end up. 10 wins, 12 wins, 13 wins by the end of the year. I think it's actually hard to go totally basement on some of these numbers because at the end of the day, you're still going to win a handful of games. You're still going to have to throw out the basketballs and have guys play 48 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think Mikal Bridges himself is worth 13 wins, so I don't think that's personally like the calculus is probably happening here.
No. But it's like the only dramatic change to the roster, right? Like you're
correct.
like, huh.
You're not, and I don't think you're suggesting that, but just to clarify. So I don't think that that's like he alone is worth it. I will say, I know he gets dragged a lot because of the season he had. When you effectively replace Mikal Bridges with like Shake Milton, which is the 1-to-1 trade that happened there, your team's worse. Like no other way around it. I know people want to just drag Mikal all the way through here, but he's still a very good player. When you trade him for effectively nothing, your team gets worse on its face. So I think like just alone, I think that the Bridges hate have probably gone a little too far. When you factor in that the team got just markedly worse, also with the idea that they're just not going to probably try to get these wins. Like, starters are probably going to play some capped minutes, right? Like, I think we're going to see like deeper rotations into the bench. We're going to see younger guys show up here. We're going to see guys rest a lot more than we have seen before. Hey, it's just a night off for this guy, injuries managed with like just much more aggressively in that, like, oh, you're a little banged up, you're just going to sit out. We're not going to push through. We're not pushing through any injury. So
Yeah.
I think there's lots of little factors that factor in here, other than just like the talent on the court, which I do want to talk about. But I think that when you factor in just sort of when the mentality, because I think last year, if anything, I want to say like, oh, they won 32 games. They could have lost a lot more. And they had some early season where they were pushing easily. I don't think that that team last year was a 32 win team. All right. I think it was probably worse. So I think there's lots of little cuts you can make along here that are not hard to get that number all the way down. And it's still aggressively low.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I actually think the good point that you bring up here is kind of all of the fringe decisions that impact a roster, right? You say going back to last season when this team goes on a bit of a run to start the year. Remember, they're a 500 ball club. They're a few games over 500, going 20 and 21 games into the season through all the way through December. They've got 12-9 as a record count here at one point for this team. But the big factor is, like you said, well, Mikal Bridges never coming off the court, playing every single minute. You're going to use all of your veteran players and use your best talent all of the time. Guy has an injury. Well, can you play through it? That starts to change a little bit for this team as you get to the back half of the season. But by and large, like every team that comes in with an agenda, as the Nets did, we want to make the play-in tournament. We want to be a playoff team again. You're going to push every button that points in that direction. This season, however, you may push a lot of buttons that say Cam Thomas. Oh, and a little injury concern here. Well, we're not going to risk something that could affect you another year from now when we're going to get into the draft and think we're going to really start to turn the corner on our rebuild. Same thing maybe with veterans from between now, if they're still on the roster, and getting towards the trade deadline. We're not going to risk Johnson or Dorian Finney-Smith or Dennis Schroeder. Like, we're not going to risk any of these guys on some low-level injuries if we think there's going to be a market or value for them going forward. So those things, just at the top, as you mentioned, I don't prescribe 13 wins to Mikal Bridges alone, but it's all these collective factors that make you turn around and go, yeah. And you know what? In a second here, I actually think it's interesting to maybe reflect a little bit back on last season as well as looking at the current roster right now, because we talked about a year ago where their win total was and could they hit the over. But they may have actually been worse than a 32-50 team a season ago if a couple of things break different directions. So maybe this win total is not as far off, even from a year ago, taking Mikal Bridges off the table. We'll get into that and also what we think will happen here with some of these veterans on the roster in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at GameTime. Look, you're buying tickets, whether it's for the concert, whether it's for the play, whether it's for the MLB game during the summer, you want to head over to our friends over at GameTime. Look, baseball is rolling all summer, back from the All-Star break. Good to go. Multiple options here in the New York City area. Obviously, you got the Subway Series starting at $50 over at GameTime. So that's pretty good. Still pretty good deal there. If you want to go a little bit lower, you go Braves at Mets coming up over the weekend, $26. That's getting you started of just a little what they have over to offer over on GameTime. They got flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing, views from your seat so you know exactly what you're going to see when you sit down, the lowest price guarantee, GameTime ticket coverage as well, super flexible customer service policy. Also, it's all there for you when you go over to GameTime. You're going to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. $20 off your first purchase, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about win totals and where the state of this roster currently sits, I do want to get into just a couple other teams here that impact the Nets directly in terms of where their win and loss totals are. But in terms of the roster, do you look at this as the other big factor you could say is one that obviously final year for Ben Simmons and that contract, and that's another injury risk, but that doesn't have, now you're missing one more player on this team potentially. Even the moves that they've made this offseason, we talked about Zaire Williams the other day. Okay, great. That's a flyer on a guy who hasn't had a lot of success. So you are, so far, the Brooklyn Nets have taken away talent, and the talent that they've added in, we would mostly say is flyer, low level, low risk, but also very low ceiling in terms of being pleasantly surprised that some of these players turn around and make an impact on the court that would in any world start to impact wins and losses in a real way.
Yeah, to impact wins and losses, some of these guys would have to take massive leaps. I just don't, and I just don't think it's going to happen. And that's fine. It's no one's kind of rooting for it. I mean, I think we want to see individual progress. I think we want to see. You want to say like, oh, okay, well, they were poorly coached over the last couple of years between Jacques Vaughn, and Kevin Ollie, and Jordi Fernandez is an upgrade there. I think that's like probably almost for sure true. It is true. Like, he's coaching Team Canada, the guy's got like already front of bench experience. So I think like maybe the coaching is going to make a material impact. I can hear that. From a roster standpoint, though, even with the moves they've made, they have just like major deficiencies. They have a huge deficiency at guard just to start, right? They have really like no high-end guard play outside of probably Cam Thomas, and you're probably still asking for like a leap to happen for him in terms of just overall playmaking to get there. Good player, but if we're just evaluating guards, it's a very easy process actually when you look at this Nets roster. And I want to be really clear about one thing really too. I actually still feel uncomfortable about this under. I mean, this under, we're talking historically low numbers here. So like, it's not like I'm firing in the under on 19.5,
Right.
because I mean, that's asking for a lot of losses. And that's just not a comfortable thing. Like, it doesn't actually take a lot to go right to get over that number, right? I mean, we're talking criminally low. Criminally no. I mean, the Pistons were at 14 games and they lost 1 million in a row last year. So it's not like, so I'll make one more point about the roster, but like, do you agree with that? Like, even with talking about this team, I don't think I could hammer the button on the under on 19.5, just because you're asking for one of like all-time worst team territory to feel comfortable about it. I'm not trying to go all the way there.
Well, and so on the roster specifically, first, like, it's, saying, hey, Keon Johnson, he gets his contract. Jalen Wilson, MVP of the Summer League. Like, there's young guys, Noah Clowney taking the next step, that I think when you're doing these predictions and you're looking at the rosters, you go, okay, well, you can't count on any of these players to now be worth X in terms of the wins and losses. But there's an unknown variable there. The other side of it is looking at this team relative to other rosters and what their agenda is. So when you talk about hitting that, okay, 19.5, the Nets are always going to be on the cautionary side of injuries. They're always going to be, worried about XYZ. There's also the world where the Nets get circled on some nights as being, hey, this game isn't important to us, team X, Y, or Z. And guess what? Like, maybe we try to mail it in and we steal one. There could be a version of this season where the Nets get a few more wins on the year because other teams go, listen, B squad, go out and take care of business against Brooklyn. And if we don't get it, we don't get it, because we circled a key matchup in our conference we need to take care of, or it's a travel, a back-to-back XYZ. I find that to be interesting when you talk about 19.5 and saying, does that mean that I think that this team can't win 25 games? Of course not. Like, yeah, they could win. They can win 25 games. Do I think they could win 16 games? That's a very low amount. Like, under 20 wins is a very low number for a team to win. When you mentioned Detroit a year ago, it's like, you got to do a lot of losing for really big stretches to have that come to fruition. So no, I would not be rushing in to put the slip that says, yeah, Brooklyn, I think they're more likely to win 17 than they are to win 20 or 21 games this year.
Yeah, and like, if we look at last year, there was only 2 teams under this number. One was Detroit, and one was sneakily the Wizards. Wizards only had one more win than the Pistons last year, which it kind of gets thrown. I mean, they got it done. The Pistons did the Wizards a massive favor last year.
Yeah, the Pistons were the badge of honor of being, quote unquote, always the worst team. Detroit. Meanwhile, the Wizards were
in the vibes department, you wouldn't have put them close, but you look at the end of the season and you're like, oh man, it was actually really close. But I think like just an instructive, and also too, what has to factor in too is some of these other teams, once they call sort of no mercy near, like, and they realize that their hopes are sinking, they're going to be incentivized to head to the bottom too, because everyone still knows Cooper Flag is here and not everyone's making the playoffs, right? So there's going to be other
games to go in the season. There's going to be a lot more teams throwing their hat in the ring for how low.
Way more than, I would say even more than that. I think that, so you didn't say a number. I think there's going to be teams that we don't even necessarily expect to happen to are going to be in there trying to rack up the loss department also. And some of these games, like leverage games, sort of weirdly on the low end against the Nets, will be important. So I think that's like another thing to factor in. But just look at rosters. Just go through depth charts of different teams, and you'll find every team would have guys that would easily start for the Nets, right? Even the worst ones, right? Like, you just even go over I mentioned the Wizards, like their depth chart this year, Brogdon, Kuzma, I mean, Valanciunas, maybe you're not with Claxton here. And Sars totally stunk in Summer League, but like, multiple guys there would, I mean, Kuzma would be probably the Nets' best player. And so I'm not making a case for like these other teams or why they're good. It's just that like if you just look at the overall roster construction and overall breadth of talent, the Nets, I know Nets fans want to point to all these guys and what the future can be with some of them, and I'm all with it. Totally. Like I'm all on the upside for Noah Clowney. I think Claxton's a good player. Let's go best case scenario for Cam Thomas. We're still asking for like major leaps from everybody, basically across the board, to even be a semblance of not bad. You know what I mean? And that's just like asking, that's just asking tons from a very, very young roster designed specifically for this. They're designed perfectly for this. It's like great. It's a great season to do this.
I wanted to talk about like there's a surprising team here. Talk about the guys. Detroit's right there, as is Washington, as is Portland in terms of win total over unders. But where would you, if every fan will put your feet to this and they'll hold you to it, Doug.
Good.
Where would you put the cap? Like where would you put the ceiling of the Nets, like at right now as constructed on their win total, right? Like say everything does break right and the Jalen Wilson leap and Cam Thomas, all these guys like they kind of hit and development is going the right way. The coaching is better. How many more wins would you tack on if you were resetting it in the optimistic version of this season? Where would you put the win total line instead of 19.5 like FanDuel has it? Would you go 24.5 or 25? Like how high would you be willing to go on that?
So I guess the question, I guess, to reverse the question would be, what number would I automatically hit the under on?
Yes, yeah.
Like what would I automatically hit the under on because I feel like this is the cap? I would say it's like 25.5. And I think that like I would feel awesome about that.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not like some hot take. It's 5 wins over the market number. So it's like, so it's not like some super sharp betting angle to take some huge number way more than the thing. It's like I'd smash the under. Yeah, well, guess what? Everyone would, and then it would instantly come down. So it's I totally I get how the market moves on stuff like this, but
yeah,
like that feels the complete ceiling. Again, you have to factor in overall talent. I'm still very much on the low side, especially in the scoring department. Everyone underrates this. It's like, hey, everyone wants to be Clowney. Everyone like wants to see best case scenario with Clowney, Claxton, all these guys. Where is the scoring going to come from this team? Like they can't score. They're not going to be able to score. Like Cam Thomas is like basically the only guy who can consistently, get you anywhere close or over 20 points a game. There's nobody else in this roster that's even close. So I think that just from the scoring department, even if they put their absolute best foot forward, even with a new system, I think they're going to really, really struggle to get the ball in the basket in the half court.
Keon Johnson supporters and believers, and also Jalen Wilson fan clubbers are going to be coming for Doug on that one. Can't score? Come on now. That just sounds insane. But in a second here.
Sorry, they were good in summer league. I get it. It's great. It's a great story. Like I know I'm busting your butt because like you're speaking for the fan, but I don't know, you don't really believe. They were good in summer league. Awesome. Yeah. That's great. Like lots of guys are good in summer league. Okay, great. Then let's have something here. They're not superstars.
And the reality is too that even when these guys, a Keon Johnson or a Jalen Wilson, like when they go off and they have a great game, it's going to be amazing. But like with any player, young or veteran or experienced, then there's going to be the lulls. Then there's going to be the learning curve games. Then there's going to be the step back games. And those I think are going to be where the fan base has to remind themselves what this season is and what the agenda is and why.
Well, they're playing against guys. They're going to be playing against a bunch of guys who, guess what, don't need to play in summer league because they're all NBA players.
Right.
Guess what? All the rest of the league is guys that didn't get invited to summer league because they're too good.
Coming up here in one moment, we'll talk about a couple teams right around the Brooklyn Nets in terms of the win-loss total. Is there any risk of those teams tanking down underneath Brooklyn in the pursuit of Cooper Flag? And also, what is the over-under on more moves being made by this team to ensure we get that bottom feeder record? We'll dive into that to close out today's episode in just one moment. All right, as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, of course, we all understand we're excited for every young player on this roster. Doug Norrie, he trends more negative. He doesn't believe in any of them. Me personally, I like to think that this team can get something done. And by which, I mean they can win less than 24 games or so and get themselves in a good spot to have a top draft pick. The one thing I'll say about this list real quick, as far as FanDuel is concerned, the Blazers being at 21.5, I mean, they may be, whether they want to or not, taking the crown or the mantle of like team that can't figure it out and start to get some wins on their ledger here. Obviously, Detroit made moves this offseason. Whether or not we think they're great for them, they still are trying to get in the right direction. They are only, well, the Wizards are there 21.5 again, but then the Pistons are only at 25.5. I will just say, like, I want to ask you which team you think is the most concerning of flipping to the tank and becoming a concern for this team. Maybe it is the Chicago Bulls, who come in at 27.5. This team remains an enigma every year for very different reasons. Over the last couple of years, it was, why are they still trying to win basketball games? This team clearly stinks, but they refuse to give up the veteran talent. Now DeRozan is gone. You expect more trades to come for them. That was the team that just 27.5. I thought, wow. I mean, I guess good for them or bad for them, depending on what their intentions are. Is that the team you think that at some point here, whether it's before the season or at the beginning of the year, is going to flip and jettison every asset they possibly can and become the most dangerous threat for the highest lottery odds with Brooklyn?
Was that the Bulls you said?
Yeah, the Bulls, yeah.
Yeah, they kind of came out and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna try this season." I'll tell you right now. We said this multiple times. The Bulls are the test case, are the canary in the coal mine, kind of for like what the Nets could have become, and which is like the worst version of this, which is holding on for all these assets too long, getting nothing for them, not knowing which way to go because you can't trade any of these guys. So anyway, look to the Bulls if you want to know how it could have gone for the Nets if they had sort of like middled for a long time. I don't think they're the greatest threat. Although the reason they're a threat is because they have a top 4 protected pick that like they really I think it's a top 4 or top 10. They have a protected pick that they don't want to convey, and so they're going to be really incentivized if it's going a little off the rails to hopefully. But they just made such weird decisions that I never totally trust them. I think the Blazers are an interesting one in the bad department. Like they could, trade Jeremy Grant. Ayton doesn't kind of like really lead to a lot of wins, right? The guards kind of never work out. Still a lot of talent probably on the team, but they've just been so bad for so long. I don't actually think maybe the Wizards because they trade Kuzma and they really want to be bad too. They're under a new regime that's trying to has kind of figured out that they need to, go bad. Sar could be horrible. And I think they're probably the biggest threat. Like Poole is a great tank commander. In terms of just a guy you want to play a lot of minutes that just has super low IQ basketball and just so I think the Wizards are easily the biggest threat here, and I actually don't probably think it's close.
The just to clarify, Chicago Bulls via Portland 1-14 first round pick protected in next year's draft class, so they got
so I thought it was lower, so maybe that's a little different. So I thought it was well, first I guess 1-4, and then I guess
that's coming in via Portland. So they're going to be watching what the Blazers are up to, and then the Blazers. That's a big enough, even just to kind of your point though about teams and what they'll be looking to do. That's a wide enough range where if you're the Blazers, guess what? Not going to impact our agenda in terms of what we do this year when we're protected all the way through the lottery in terms of that draft pick. I think the Wizards, they've remained that team. And whether or not you love what Detroit has done, this is the difference. But really the point getting to here is there's teams that are not going to be willing to move in that direction maybe, or at least will hold on a little bit longer early on. Yeah, that'll hold on just long enough that all of a sudden when you get to the point where you say, okay, Detroit's going to flip the switch, Portland, the Wizards, even Chicago, when these teams finally make their choice of we're ready to go into the tank now and give ourselves the best odds, hopefully, I hate to do this, but it's like hopefully by that point, the Nets have kind of banked enough of those early season losses that it carries the day when it gets down the back stretch. And I actually think that is the big variable here. It's talent on the current rosters, the Nets included, and then the early season. The Nets aren't going in and saying, hey, don't worry, we're trying to lose games, but they're constructed in a way to organically lose games, right? That's the difference here. The Nets are set up from a talent standpoint to go out, want to play hard, want to develop, want to look good, want to see young talent, get out there and flash for the crowd, and also probably lose the games anyway. And it's a very thin line here, but it is a difference between them and the few teams directly ahead of them in terms of these win-loss totals.
It's like the best version because you get max effort, and then I think you'll get max effort, and then it's just like you at some point in the NBA, the talent wins. That's just the end. That's the whole story. Is the talent just wins. You can punch above your weight class for sure for a little while, not for 82 games, right? Like it just doesn't work that way. You just have to at some point have a top 10, top 15 player to be really good, or like 2 guys in the top 25, 3 guys, like you need to aggregate talent in some way, in the way that the Nets really, even if they were again punching so far up. I just don't. I really just don't think they can do. And also, it is interesting about some of these teams because, so Giants fans will know this because it's like sometimes you don't want to squeak out. It's fun to squeak out those wins, and then it's all of a sudden you can't draft the quarterback you want because Tommy DeVito just happened to win you a game, right? Like or two in the worst possible situations.
Totally worth it.
I think the Nets starting out probably on the very clear, hey, we're not even trying to sell anything to the fans. Some of these teams have to sell something to the fans early. The Bulls, probably the Pistons, the Hornets, probably not the Wizards as much, but like they have to at least go out there and say, hey, guess what? We're going to try this year. The Nets aren't even going to bother doing that. And I think that actually does matter too, in terms of coaching jobs on the line. The Nets have just all these things in place that just don't have to stick to narrative street like some of these other teams are going to have to, at least through the first 30 games, let's say, until they can like realistically look everyone in the face like, hey, we got to do what's best for the team. But the Nets are going to start day one not having to do that.
Yeah. And you can't sell it in the same way. You mentioned like NFL. It's like you can't sell it the same way because it's too tight. There's only 17 games. One more win or one more loss is a big difference then, or you don't have control of it in the same way. The Tommy DeVito effect. This random quarterback comes in and wins a couple of football games and ruins the opportunity to draft a franchise quarterback. That isn't the case. When you see the game winner from Cam Thomas, from Jalen Wilson, from Noah Clowney, you get to celebrate it because in the totality over 82, it's not probably going to have that ultimate impact. One thing, also, I'm really quick here, I'm going to throw out that I also would pay attention to like the Jazz and the Hornets.
Jazz are another one that I was going to put on there too. That's a good one. Yeah.
Jazz are like, hey, we're about to
trade marketing.
Yeah. And they've got veterans there that are ready to get moved that teams would like. So they could go from to 27.5 over under for them. So it's interesting. I find some of those teams in the 27 to 29 win total range to actually be more intriguing because those are the teams that are we sneaking in or are we? Oh, no, sorry. We just flipped the switch and we're going to go full tank here. The only other thing that I wanted to bring up that we'll probably do a fuller episode on, I thought it was going to be, hey, let's add in over under on number of players traded for Brooklyn before the season. But we had plenty to talk about in terms of this win-loss. I'll say for me personally, if I set it at 1.5 over under, Doug, getting out the door, veterans traded before the regular season for the Brooklyn Nets, what are you taking?
Under. And also, I say under. I just think we're probably going to get into the regular season with this as the team. And I'll also, one thing about this over under, we're going to get out of here. You're talking to the two donkeys that have just hammered the over on the Nets wins for season over season. So the fact that we're even talking about the under is like nearly guaranteed over because no one's been more wrong about this on a season to season basis than the guys on this podcast. Because last year,
was it a year ago, 37.5? I think
every single year. This is why you do not bet on your team. Like you just don't do it. You don't have
even as two guys that try to be pretty objective, we still fall prey.
I think we are a team centrist as possible with our takes, like in a very highly sort of like sports partisan world, like where it's become you take your partisan being the take that you have and then you just go all in it. We are as center as it gets. We bet the over on this dumb team every single year and they just never make it and it's never even close. So now the part where we even just mention the under is nearly a guarantee that this thing's going to be over by a million miles. And that's just the way it goes. All right, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets. Wherever you listen to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to the podcast too on any podcast feed. Give it 5 stars wherever you are. Anything less, don't even want to hear from you. But at 5 stars, let's get those reviews in.
If you focus on what you left behind, you will never be able to see what lies ahead. Why that is Gusteau from Ratatouille.
Oh, there we go. R.I.P. Probably. Those guys don't live long.
But he died happy.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, 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 basketball.